My name is Rachel, and I am 32 years old. I work as a paralegal in a medium-sized law firm, a job that demands long hours of research, drafting documents, and supporting attorneys in cases that often feel overwhelming. It is not glamorous, but it is stable, and after years of uncertainty, I value stability more than anything. I rent a small apartment near downtown. I take the bus to work most mornings, and I spend my evenings buried in files or sipping tea while reading case law. To most people, I look like just another professional woman trying to get by. But behind that facade lies a story of pain, betrayal, and resilience that began the moment I refused to live by the script my parents had written for me. I grew up in a household where tradition was everything. My father, Victor, ran a small grocery store that had been in our family for decades, and my mother, Lillian, worked as a seamstress from home. They were strict, deeply rooted in cultural expectations, and to them, family honor outweighed individual happiness. I was the eldest daughter, which in their eyes meant I was the bridge to preserve their values. My younger brother, Adam, was given freedom to pursue his dreams, but I was groomed for one thing only: marriage. From the time I was a teenager, my parents whispered about good families, about respectable husbands, about alliances that would secure my future. For years, I nodded politely, too afraid to argue, while secretly dreaming of building a career, earning my own money, and carving my own path. The pressure began in earnest when I turned 27. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table one evening, her voice gentle but firm, and said, "Rachel, it's time. You cannot waste your best years on books and offices. We've found someone suitable for you." His name was Henry, a 35-year-old businessman whose family had ties to ours through distant relatives. I had met him once at a wedding. He was arrogant, dismissive, the kind of man who spoke to women as if they were children. My stomach churned at the thought. I told my parents politely but firmly, "I'm not interested." My father's face darkened instantly. "This is not about interest, Rachel. This is about respect and duty. You will not shame us by refusing." From that day forward, my home turned into a battlefield. Every dinner became an interrogation. My mother pleaded, "You will learn to love him. Love comes after marriage." My father thundered, "Do you think you know better than us? Do you think your little job makes you wiser than tradition?" Adam stayed silent, his eyes downcast, unwilling to challenge them. I tried to reason, to explain that I wanted independence, that I wasn't ready, that marriage should be about choice. But my words bounced off walls hardened by decades of expectation. The breaking point came one Sunday afternoon. Henry and his parents came over, expecting me to agree. I sat in the living room, hands shaking, and said the words that would alter my life forever. "I will not marry him. I will not marry anyone you choose for me. I will decide for myself." The silence that followed was deafening. Then my father's face turned red, and he shouted so loudly the neighbors could hear, "If you refuse this marriage, you are no daughter of mine. Pack your things and leave." My mother's tears flowed, but she didn't stop him. She whispered, "Rachel, don't do this." But her voice was drowned out by my father's rage. Within an hour, I was on the street with a single suitcase, my childhood home no longer mine. I remember standing there, trembling, watching the door slam shut behind me, realizing that the people who were supposed to protect me had chosen tradition over me. That night, I slept on a friend's couch, tears soaking the pillow, my mind replaying every moment. I had no plan, no savings beyond a small account I had managed to keep hidden, and no family to lean on. But even in that devastation, a seed of resolve took root. If my parents thought throwing me out would break me, they were wrong. I would build a life on my own terms. And one day, they would see me, not as the failure they thought, but as the daughter who survived without them. The first months after I was kicked out felt like a punishment I wasn't sure I could endure. I moved from couch to couch, staying with friends who offered me temporary shelter, each time pretending I was fine while inside I was terrified. I had my small savings, just enough to cover bus fare, food, and part of the rent when a former college classmate, Jenna, let me share her tiny apartment. I slept on a futon in her living room, worked long hours at a coffee shop during the day, and applied desperately for jobs at night. Each rejection email felt like another slap, a reminder that I had walked away from security and chosen a road full of uncertainty. And yet I refused to go back. Pride and stubbornness kept me from knocking on my parents' door, even though there were nights when the loneliness was so unbearable that I almost my father didn't call. My mother sent me one text message in those early months. "Rachel, please reconsider. You'll regret this." I stared at it for hours, torn between anger and longing, before finally deleting it. My brother Adam remained silent, too afraid to take a side, and in many ways, that silence hurt more than my father's rage. I felt abandoned, not just by parents, but by the family I had grown up believing would be my foundation. But slowly, I began to build something of my own. I applied for a paralegal certificate program at a community college, using what little money I had left to cover tuition. I worked double shifts at the coffee shop, my feet aching, my hands blistered from steaming milk and scrubbing counters, but every paycheck meant one more step toward independence. Jenna cheered me on, telling me, "You're tougher than you think, Rachel. One day, you'll look back at this and see how far you've come." Her words kept me going on nights when exhaustion made me cry in the bathroom at work. 2 years later, I landed my first position at a small law office, answering phones and filing paperwork. It wasn't glamorous, but when I signed my own lease for a one-bedroom apartment, tiny, with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, I felt like I had conquered a mountain. For the first time, I could stand in my own space, shut the door, and know I belonged there. I hung a cheap secondhand bookshelf in the corner, lined it with law textbooks, and promised myself I would keep climbing. Meanwhile, I heard whispers about my parents through relatives. They told people I had lost my way, that I was selfish and ungrateful. At weddings and family gatherings, I was spoken of in hushed tones, as if I were a stain on the family name. Some cousins stopped inviting me, choosing sides to protect their own standing. It cut deeply, but it also hardened me. If my own blood could dismiss me so easily, then I would stop begging for their approval. The hardest part, though, came during quiet evenings. I would sit at my small kitchen table, eating instant noodles after a 10-hour workday, and wonder if I had made a mistake. Would my life have been easier if I had agreed to the marriage? Would I be in a large house now, taken care of, instead of struggling to pay rent? Then I remembered Henry's smug face, his dismissive tone, his arrogance, and I knew the truth. Maybe I was exhausted, maybe I was broke, but I was free. And freedom, I told myself, was worth every sacrifice. By the time I turned 30, I had built a modest but steady life. I was working at a mid-sized law firm, respected by my colleagues, known for being reliable and thorough. I had new friends, a small circle of people who admired my resilience, and slowly, my confidence grew. Yet every time I passed by my old neighborhood, every time I saw the grocery store where my father still worked or the windows of the house where I had grown up, a pang of grief hit me. I wanted to walk in, to hug my mother, to laugh with Adam. But I stayed away because I knew I wasn't ready to face the rejection again. What I didn't know then was that time changes everything. And one day, the same parents who had cast me out without hesitation would come knocking on my door, asking for a place in the life I had built without them. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, years after I had been thrown out. I was leaving the office late, clutching files under my arm, when I saw a familiar figure waiting by the bus stop across the street. My heart froze. It was my mother. She looked older, thinner, her once dark hair streaked with gray. She held a small umbrella, but the wind turned it useless, and the sight of her standing there trembling stirred something deep inside me. For a moment, I wanted to run to her, to throw my arms around her, and let all the years of hurt wash away. But then I remembered the night I stood with my suitcase outside that house, the door slamming behind me. The wound reopened instantly. She crossed the street, her eyes filling with tears the moment they met mine. "Rachel," she whispered, her voice fragile. "Please don't turn away." I stood frozen, rain dripping from my coat, files pressed to my chest like a shield. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She clasped her hands together nervously. Your father, he's not well. And Adam is busy with his own family. I miss you. We need you. Her words cut me open, not because of what she said, but because I couldn't tell if it was love or desperation that brought her to me. That night, I let her come up to my apartment. She looked around the small space, her eyes lingering on the bookshelf filled with law books, the photos of friends pinned to the fridge. You've built a life, she whispered, almost in awe. I always knew you were strong. I wanted to scream then, why didn't you protect me? Why didn't you fight for me when he kicked me out? But I stayed silent, afraid that if I let the anger out, it would drown us both. She told me my father's health was declining, that the grocery store was struggling, and that Adam rarely visited because of work and his young children. He needs you, she said softly. We need you back. The bitterness rose in my throat. You needed me when I was 27 too. And you chose to abandon me. Her eyes filled with tears. Your father was stubborn. I was weak. I regret it every day. Over the next weeks, the calls started. First from my mother, then from distant relatives, all with the same message. Come home, help us, forgive us. My father didn't call, of course, his pride wouldn't allow it, but I could feel his hand behind every word. Part of me longed to give in. I wanted to sit at that kitchen table again, to smell my mother's cooking, to hear Adam laugh like we used to. But another part of me, the part that had scraped by on instant noodles, who had worked double shifts to pay rent, who had sat alone in an empty apartment crying into a pillow, couldn't forget. The real test came when I visited my parents' house for the first time in years. My mother greeted me at the door, hugging me as though she'd never let go. The house smelled the same, familiar, suffocating, full of memories. And then I saw my father. He sat in his chair, thinner than I remembered, his face etched with lines of age and illness. His eyes flicked up at me, and for a second, I saw something almost like guilt. But then his jaw tightened and he muttered, "So you finally decided to visit." The words stung, but I held my ground. "I didn't leave, Dad. You kicked me out." The room went silent. My mother's hands trembled as she brought tea. Adam stood awkwardly in the doorway with his children tugging at his sleeve, and I stared at the man who had once made me feel so small. For the first time, I didn't flinch. That night, as I walked home, my heart was a storm of emotions: anger, sadness, longing. My parents wanted me back in their lives now that they were weak and lonely, but where were they when I needed them most? I didn't know yet if I could forgive. But I did know one thing: I wasn't the same Rachel they had cast out. I had built myself from the ground up, and they would have to face that truth if they wanted me back. Walking back into my parents' house after so many years was like stepping into a battlefield layered with memories. The walls hadn't changed, the same family photos hung in the hallway, but the warmth I once associated with them was gone. Every room seemed to carry echoes of arguments, of tears, of the night I was thrown out with nothing but a suitcase. Still, I went back a few more times, mostly because of my mother's pleading and Adam's occasional calls urging me to at least see Dad while you still can. The second time I visited, the atmosphere was thicker, heavier. My father sat in his chair by the window, oxygen machine quietly hissing at his side. He looked weaker than ever, but his pride remained intact. When I walked in, his eyes narrowed, and without even greeting me, he said, "So, you're finally ready to listen to us?" The audacity of that question hit me like a slap. I sat across from him, spine straight, and replied firmly, "No, I came to see if you are ready to listen to me." The room fell silent. My mother wrung her hands nervously, Adam cleared his throat, but my father leaned forward, his eyes burning with the same fire I had grown up fearing. "You disgraced this family, Rachel," he said, his voice shaking but still sharp. "We gave you everything, and you threw it back in our faces because you refused to honor tradition." My chest tightened, but I refused to back down. "No, Dad," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "You didn't give me everything. You gave me a prison and called it love. You tried to sell my future to a man I didn't want. That's not honor. That's control." His hand trembled on the armrest. "You don't understand. Marriage was security. It was respect. Without it, what are you?" I leaned closer, my voice rising. "I am independent. I am educated. I am standing here today because I fought for myself when you turned your back on me. You think Henry would have respected me? He laughed at women, treated them like trophies. You were willing to hand me over just to save face in front of your friends." For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe doubt. But then his pride surged again. "You speak like someone poisoned by the outside world," he muttered. "We only wanted what was best for you." My anger boiled over. What was best for me? Dad, you kicked me out into the street in the middle of the night. You left me with nothing. Do you know what it's like to beg friends for a couch to sleep on? To work 12-hour shifts just to afford noodles? You didn't protect me. You abandoned me. And now, when you're old and sick, you want me back. But not once have you said the words I deserve. I'm sorry." My mother began to cry softly, pleading for us to stop. Adam shifted uncomfortably, his children playing in the next room, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. But my father sat silent, his lips pressed into a thin line, unable or unwilling to give me the apology I needed. The weight of years hung between us, and I realized this was the confrontation I had waited for my whole life. I left that night shaking, my emotions in chaos. Part of me wanted to slam the door on them forever, to finally cut the cord that had caused me so much pain. Another part still longed for reconciliation, for the impossible dream of hearing my father admit he had been wrong. As I walked back to my apartment, the city lights blurred through my tears, and I realized something painful. Even if my parents begged to be in my life now, it would never erase the years they left me alone in the dark. After that heated confrontation, word spread quickly among our extended family. It amazed me how fast relatives could carry stories, twisting them into versions that suited their own opinions. Within a week, I was getting calls from aunts and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years. One aunt scolded me, saying, "Rachel, your father is sick. You should humble yourself and stop clinging to the past." Another relative murmured, "It's family, dear. You can't turn your back, no matter what happened." No one seemed to remember the night I was thrown out into the street with a suitcase. No one mentioned the tears I shed, the hunger I endured, or the fear of being completely alone. They only cared about me stepping back into my parents' lives to ease their guilt. The pressure built. At work, I tried to bury myself in case files and deadlines, but the messages followed me everywhere. My mother called constantly, begging me to let the past go. Adam texted me late one night saying, "You're making things harder. Dad needs peace, and your stubbornness isn't helping." Staring at his words, I nearly dropped my phone. Stubbornness? That was the word they used for my survival, my refusal to be sold into a loveless marriage, my fight to stand on my own. I decided to visit again, partly because I needed answers. When I walked into the living room, several relatives were gathered, their eyes heavy with judgment. My father sat in his chair, pale and frail, but still holding court like the head of the family. The conversation turned into an ambush almost immediately. One uncle said, "Rachel, you should be grateful your parents raised you. Whatever happened, you owe them obedience." Another chimed in, "It's shameful to still be unmarried at your age. Don't you see why they tried to help you?" My blood boiled. I stood, fists clenched, and shouted, "Help me? They kicked me out because I wanted freedom. They abandoned me when I needed them most. And none of you were there when I was struggling. Not one of you opened your door to me. Don't you dare lecture me about gratitude." The room fell into shocked silence. My mother wept quietly, covering her face, while my father's expression hardened. He coughed, his voice hoarse, but managed to say, "You've become bitter, Rachel. Success has poisoned you." I froze, my jaw tightening.
No, Dad.
Success saved me. I survived without you, without this family's approval, without the safety net you ripped away. I built a life while you prayed for me to fail. And now that you're weak, now that you're lonely, you want me back. But not because you love me, because you need me." The weight of my words hung in the air like smoke. Adam glared at me, his hands shaking with anger. "You don't know what you're saying," he muttered. I turned to him, my eyes burning. "I know exactly what I'm saying. I am tired of being treated like a burden for wanting my own life. If Dad can't say he's sorry for what he did, then I don't know if I can ever truly forgive." I left the house that night with my heart pounding, the voices of my relatives still echoing in my head. Outside, the cold night air hit me like a wave, and for a moment I leaned against my car, fighting back tears. They wanted me to forget, to forgive without acknowledgement, to erase years of pain with a single word: family. But I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And yet, deep inside, I still felt the pull. The longing for parents who would finally see me, not as a rebel or a disappointment, but as their daughter. That longing, that ache, was the one chain I hadn't been able to break. After that night with my relatives cornering me, I decided to pull back. For weeks, I avoided calls, silenced messages, and buried myself in work. At the firm, I was handling more responsibility, managing depositions, drafting briefs, and assisting in cases that often stretched past midnight. My supervisor, Daniel, began to praise my dedication openly, and for the first time, I started to feel like my career was more than just survival. It was a platform I had built from nothing. Yet, even in the glow of professional respect, my personal life still felt weighed down by the constant tug-of-war with my family. It wasn't long before my parents found another way to reach me. One Saturday morning, as I stepped out of my apartment to head to the market, I found my mother waiting by the entrance. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. "Rachel, please," she whispered, clutching her purse tightly. "Your father is worse. The store is failing. We can't manage on our own anymore. We need your help." My chest tightened. I wanted to turn away, to remind her of the night they threw me out with nothing, but the sight of her trembling hands stopped me. I invited her inside. Over tea, she confessed everything. The grocery store was nearly bankrupt. The debts had piled up, and my father's health made it impossible for him to manage it. Adam visited occasionally, but he had his own family and wasn't willing to shoulder the burden. "You're the only one strong enough," she said, her voice breaking. "You've built so much on your own. Please, Rachel, come back. Help us." Her words stirred a storm in me. Part of me wanted to laugh bitterly. After all the rejection, now I was suddenly the strong one. Another part wanted to scream at her, to demand why I had to be the savior for the very people who had abandoned me. But underneath all that, I felt something else: guilt. No matter how much I tried to harden myself, they were still my parents. The idea of them losing everything, of watching the store collapse, cut into me. When I visited the store later that week, the reality shocked me. Shelves half empty, customers sparse, and my father sitting at the back office, coughing into a handkerchief. He looked smaller than I remembered, his once commanding voice reduced to a hoarse murmur. When he saw me, his eyes flickered with something: relief? Regret? But his pride shielded it quickly. "So, you came to look," he muttered. "Not out of love, I'm sure, but curiosity." His words stung, but instead of exploding, I spoke calmly. "No, I came because Mom asked me. Because I don't want to see everything you built collapse." He glared, his jaw tightening. "I don't need your pity, Rachel." My anger boiled, but I swallowed it down. "It's not pity, Dad. It's responsibility, the kind you refused to show me when I needed you." That visit left me shaken. I drove home with my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I wanted so badly to cut ties, to remind myself that I didn't owe them anything. But that night, lying awake in my bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the store, about my mother's tears, about my father's frail figure in that dimly lit office. The following week, my mother called again, her voice more desperate this time. "Rachel, if you don't help, we will lose everything. Your father is too proud to ask, but I am not. Please, my daughter, don't let us fall apart." I realized then that the power had shifted. For years, they held the power over me, dictating my future, throwing me out when I disobeyed. But now, the balance was in my hands. They needed me more than I needed them. And for the first time, I had to decide, would I open my arms, or would I finally let them feel the weight of the choices they had made? Standing at that crossroads was one of the hardest choices of my life. My parents, who had once cast me out without hesitation, were now on their knees, asking for space in the life I had built alone. My mother's tears, my father's failing health, the collapsing store, all of it pressed on me like a weight I couldn't ignore. But so did the memory of nights I slept on couches, the humiliating jobs I worked just to afford rent, and the silence from my family when I begged for help. They had abandoned me when I was vulnerable. Now I had to decide if I would do the same. That I visited the store one final time. My father sat in his office, weaker than ever, his hands trembling as he flipped through old receipts. For a long moment, I stood in the doorway, watching him, the man who had been both my protector and my greatest source of pain. Finally, I stepped inside. "Dad," I said softly. He looked up, his eyes tired but sharp. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered. I sat down across from him, heart pounding. "I'm here because I need to know something. Do you regret what you did to me? Throwing me out? Choosing strangers over your daughter?" The silence was unbearable. His eyes watered, his jaw clenched, and for the first time in my life, I saw him struggle to speak. Finally, in a voice hoarse with both pride and shame, he whispered, "I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was doing what was right. But yes, I regret it." The words hit me like a tidal wave. Not because they erased the pain, but because they proved he was human enough to admit it, even if it came years too late. Tears filled my eyes, and for the first time in decades, I reached across the desk and took his hand. Helping them wasn't easy. I negotiated with creditors, used my legal knowledge to restructure their debts, and helped them downsize the store into something manageable. I didn't give them everything. I made it clear I wouldn't sacrifice my own stability, but I gave enough to keep them afloat. And through it all, the dynamic shifted. For the first time, my father listened instead of commanded. My mother, once timid and silent, began to thank me openly. Even Adam, though still caught between guilt and loyalty, admitted one evening, "I should have stood up for you back then. I'm sorry." Still, forgiveness wasn't instant. Every time I sat at their table, I felt the ghosts of the past lingering. But I also felt something new: control. I wasn't the frightened 27-year-old begging to be heard. I was a woman who had built her own life, who could choose when to give and when to withhold. And that choice gave me peace. Looking back, I realized that life is never as simple as villains and heroes. My parents weren't monsters, they were flawed, bound by fear, by tradition, by pride. Their choices hurt me, scarred me, and changed me, but they also forced me to grow into the person I am today. And though I can't erase the past, I can choose not to let it define the future. To those of you listening, maybe you've lived something similar. Maybe you've been rejected by those who should have loved you, or maybe you've been pressured into living a life that wasn't yours. If that's the case, hear this. Your worth is not measured by their approval. You have the right to choose your path, even if it means walking alone. And sometimes, when the years pass, those who turned you away will come back. Not because you failed, but because you proved you could stand without them. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but maybe it reached someone who needed to hear it. If you found something in my words that resonated, I would be grateful if you subscribed and left a like. It reminds me that even out of pain, we can build connections, and even out of rejection, we can create hope. And who knows? Maybe one day, your story will be the one others listen to and find strength in.